Hey, this is Kip, and in this video series, we're learning how to fly the VisionJet in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. This is part 3, where we're going to cover how to handle a departure procedure and fly an RNAV GPS approach. I went ahead and skipped to takeoff, and this is normally something we would do before we even start moving the plane, but now we're going to review our flight plan, and this one is going to be very interesting looking for most of you. We have this section with like 4,000 feet shown here, and then there's nothing after that. And then all of a sudden we have these waypoints down here that are connected. And then over here we have this other set of waypoints that are kind of connected. So what exactly is going on here? Well, if we go look at our flight plan, we have 3 things that we're seeing. The first one is called a departure procedure. And if we look at this departure section, we can see that we're taking off from runway 8 on a heading of 077 and then climbing to 4,000 feet. And then it says here MANSEQ or MANSEQ. This is manual sequence. And this is telling us that we actually need to take action. We have to manually sequence ourselves to the next waypoint. Either ATC will give us instructions on what to do, like they'll vector us, which means just giving us headings to fly. They may tell us something like turn left heading whatever, clear direct set go, or resume on navigation, just to let us know that we can continue with our filed flight plan and following these waypoints. So that'll put us to the en route section of our flight, where we're flying up to whatever our cruise altitude is, and then we're flying to these waypoints. But then once we're on our way in, what's going on over here? It doesn't take us to our destination airport, which is over here. It just ends. And that's because when Microsoft Flight Simulator in career mode loads in an approach for us, an expected approach, like we can see here, it's expecting us to get this RNAV GPS approach. But importantly, what it's doing is it's choosing what's called a transition for this approach. That's just how we get from our en route section to the approach procedure. And in career mode, it doesn't choose a waypoint for us, which is going to be an option. It just chooses this thing called vectors or vectors to final. And that results in it just showing the final approach course only. And it also shows the waypoints on the approach that happen to be along that segment. Now, this probably seems weird because when you expect after we go to this waypoint, we'll fly out here somewhere to some other waypoint that'll let us turn around for the approach. And the answer is yes, except ATC actually has to assign that to us. Our flight plan with the ATC does not include an approach procedure. Career mode is taking its best guess on what approach we're going to get, but because it doesn't know if we're going to get one of those transition waypoints, there could be one here, there might be one that overflies the airport, goes out, and then turns around over the water here. We don't know which one of those we're going to get until ATC assigns it to us. So if ATC ends up giving us vectors to fly, then we don't need any more waypoints after this. They're going to turn us and give us a few vectors or headings to fly to turn us and get us to this final approach course to intercept it and then land on runway 9. Microsoft Flight Sim's ATC is pretty basic, and even though it will try to assign us an approach like this, sometimes people just really don't want to use the ATC after it has given them an altitude they can't climb to, or an altitude that puts them down into terrain or things like that. So because of that, something we can do is just go into our approach, look at the available transition waypoints, and just pick one for ourselves and just fly it no matter what ATC says. All we have to do is go down here to our flight plan again, and there's 2 ways to edit this approach or even choose a different approach. We can click on this and then hit Edit Approach, or if you happen to be on the home screen or you prefer to do it this way, you can go to the home and click on Proc, which means procedures. Here we can see both our departure procedure that I just talked about and the approach procedure. So we're going to edit the approach procedure. And here you can see the transition that was selected is vectors. That assumes that ATC is going to give us vectors or headings to fly to intercept that final approach course and then land. But we're going to take this into our own hands instead and just click on this and see the list of different transition waypoints that we can choose from. Before choosing one of those new transition points, we're going to hit this preview button and change it to this option here, Show on Map. You can see it's automatically zoomed in the map to show us our approach phase. It's showing us the final approach course that is represented here by choosing vectors. But what we're going to do now is change the transition waypoint and go through each of these and see which one we like the best. So I'm going to choose this first one called Sesia right here. And as soon as we choose that waypoint, we can see that it's changed the preview to show us where Sestia is. It's right up here to the north. So this waypoint makes sense for us to fly to if we're flying north of the airport or even to the west coming in from this direction. If we were to the south, though, it wouldn't make much sense. So let's go ahead and check the next one, which is TVC. This is a VOR. And this one is quite a bit further south from the airport. So if we happen to be flying from the south, this might make sense to fly to on our way. And then up here, we'll finally turn for the final approach course. And then we'll check the last one in the list, which is Bakta. And this one is a little bit south of the final approach course over here. Now, just to remind myself where we're flying from, I'm just going to go up here to the top toolbar and open up our EFB, or electronic flight bag. And if we use the flight planner app down here at the bottom, we can zoom out using our mouse wheel and then move over here and zoom in to the approach. We can see that we're following this magenta course over here first to this CGG waypoint. So this would actually be good for us because the Bakta waypoint looks like it's about here. So that means we could fly down here, fly up to that waypoint, then we fly north and then make that 90-degree turn for our final approach course. So this is going to be a great one for us. Now you can actually look at where these different transition waypoints are by using the EFB as well. So if you prefer to do it that way, the way to do it in the flight planner is first to go up to the route here. And then all you have to do is click on where it says change procedure. And here, as we click these different waypoints, you can see the map changing. We can see where we're coming from on the magenta line, and then we can see this waypoint Bakta right here, same as we see it over here on our MFD. So all I have to do now is press load. Whenever you load an approach, it's good to make sure that the flight plan still makes sense. If I go over here and look at the waypoints, we can see that it's going to go over here from CGG to Bakta, and then I can see that it's making that turn to the airport. Now, sometimes when you load one of these approach procedures, what it does is it moves the destination airport into the en route section. So it would actually take KCVX like this and automatically put it right here. This means that it's having us fly from this waypoint to the airport and then back out to the approach and then back into the airport. So that's just a waste of time to fly over the airport. You know, we're just making up the route for ourselves. We're not going to be paying attention to ETC. So we're just going to delete this if it exists in our flight plan. We want to go from our last en route waypoint to the first waypoint in our approach. So now that we have our flight plan figured out, let's go ahead and do this departure procedure. Remember, when we take off, we're going to climb to 4,000 feet, and we can still use our autopilot in navigation mode to fly that course for us. So to prepare our autopilot for this departure procedure, I have our heading bug set to 077 and our selected altitude set to 4,000 feet. And here's the 077 heading. So let's go ahead and take off. And as soon as we're up about 500 feet, I'm going to go ahead and turn the autopilot on, and I'm going to switch us into flight level change mode and navigation mode. All right, there's 500 feet. Autopilot is on. I'm going to hit nav mode. And right away, because we're already on the route, on the course for our departure procedure, FMS mode is instantly activated. All right, I'm going to hit flight level change now, and I'm going to hit enter to talk to ATC again. Getting flaps up because we're over 115 knots.
Radar contact 1 miles northeast of Charlie Yankee Yankee Bravo, 2,600 feet, altimeter tree 0. Tree 4.
Okay, and it's telling us in the steps here just to climb to 24,000 feet. So let's go ahead and change our altitude here to 24,000 as I reply to ATC again. ATC set to turn left heading 250 and proceed on course. So I'm going to go ahead and just use heading mode down here. I'm going to turn the heading bug to 250 and hit heading mode. All right, so there's 250 on heading mode. And then they said proceed on course. Now you can do heading mode like I'm doing here, or you can just go down, leave it in navigation mode, and sequence it to the next waypoint, which I'm about to do. So all we have to do to go to the next waypoint is scroll down on our flight plan, click that waypoint, and click this direct to button. So I'm going to hit direct to. Before I do that, I'm actually going to hit nav mode in advance, so it's on standby. I'm going to hit activate direct to. Now you can see instantly FMS mode is flashing green. And over here, if we look at the map, it's drawn a line directly from our plane, our current location, all the way down to that waypoint, set go. All right, so I'm almost up at my cruising altitude at 24,000 feet. If you happen to be flying in the US or Canada, then you'll need to make sure you switch over to standard barometric pressure whenever you're at or above 18,000 feet. This varies from country to country, and you can always use the comma key. If you have a keyboard, it'll automatically set it for you. If you want to do it yourself though, there's a shortcut to just right click on the baro knob here, and that will change it to say standard baro. And now that we're on cruise, we can already set up for our VNAV descent. We'll just do that by, just like in part 2, scrolling down to the approach section and finding the lowest altitude constraint before the runway. So up here you can see at Bogota, it tells us to be at or above 2,700 feet. The line underneath means we just can't be below that altitude when we cross that waypoint. And that's our IAF initial approach fix. And then after that, we have Jalpi, which is the waypoint where we're going to make a 90-degree turn at to line up with the final approach course. That one as well, we need to stay at 2,700. But after we cross that waypoint, we can descend to 2,300 when we cross Dunak, which is the final approach fix, or FAF. So all we have to do is take the bottommost altitude here before the runway, and that's what we can put into our selected altitude. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2,300 in by using the altitude selection knob right here. All right, so there's 2,300 in the selected altitude. Now all we have to do is press VNAV, and we should see a path up here on the flight mode annunciator, or FMA. And our top of descent's not for 45 minutes, so we got a ways to go. Next, let's talk about looking at our charts for things like our departure and our approach procedures. This is kind of optional because in our flight plan here, we have enough to technically fly these just using the autopilot and the information that we have here for our altitudes and our waypoints. So we're already set up to descend to the correct altitude, get lined up with runway 9, and then once we're on that final approach course all lined up, we're actually just going to hit the approach button, just like we did in part 2, to capture our vertical guidance. In this case, though, the vertical guidance is going to be much more precise because this is an actual instrument approach procedure, not a visual approach like we used in part 2. But if you want to look up the charts, we can now do that in Flight Sim 2024. You just go back to your EFB or tablet, and here what we'll do is go to the route section of our flight planner. So it's this first button in the top left. And to access the charts, all we need to do is select an airport first. So if I go to this North Bay line right here and click the I, that will select that airport and put it in this purple section on the left side of the EFB. There's a lot of information to go through here, but the charts exist in this second button down here in the purple section. And so I'll hit departures up here to look up that departure procedure chart. And you might notice there's nothing here. Well, that's because down here in the bottom right, I have FAA selected, and FAA provides charts for the United States. This airport right here is in Canada, so we're going to try the other chart provider, Lido or Lido charts. And now we can see that we have the SID. This is a standard instrument departure. This is the departure procedure that we flew when we took off from the airport. So if we go ahead and click this button on the right side here, it will load that chart for us. And we zoom in, we can see exactly what we did, which was take off here on a heading of 077 and climb to 4,000 feet or higher. As you do longer flights at bigger airports, you may see much more complicated departure procedures that have multiple altitude constraints on the climb out and multiple waypoints, having you turn and go in certain directions as part of that procedure. But in our case for this one, it was very simple. Next, we'll go back to the route screen here and then click on our destination airport instead, which is Charlevoix. I'm going to click the little I right here. Go ahead and click on the charts. And when I click on approaches, you'll see we do not have any approaches. So this is going to vary airport by airport and country by country. Basically, the FAA charts will be available at most airports in the United States, whereas the Lido or Lido charts could be available globally, but it just matters what airport you go to. They're primarily available for larger commercial airports. So because I have no charts here under the Lido selection, I'm going to choose FAA, and now we will see the RNAV GPS charts for runway 9 and 27. So we're landing on runway 9, so let's go ahead and click on this button here. And now it's loaded the chart. And this does look different than the Lido or Lido chart because it's a different chart provider. We can see here in the top right, it says Charlevoix Municipal, CVX is the airport code, and we see things like our final approach course, We see a bunch of notes here that for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just not going to get into. And then we have this map view section. This is called the plan view. So we can see actually the initial approach fix from our flight plan here, Bakta. And then it goes up here to Jalpi, then to the final approach fix, Dunak. And then it's got us on 090 course for runway 9 right here. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, there's also this other section. This is a profile view, like looking at the airport from the side and watching our plane descend down to the runway. This black line right here represents the runway. And this has those altitude constraints that we just looked at. We need to be at or above 2,700 at Jalpi, and then at or above 2,300 at Dunak. So that's where we're descending to with VNAV, is down to this final altitude here of 2,300. Over here, we can also see it says GP 3.0 degrees. That's our glide path angle. This is just a standard 3 degrees. That's actually what we do with our VNAV descent by default, as well as a 3-degree angle of descent. So this is just a normal descent all the way down towards the runway. As you do more approaches, you may see some that have glide paths that are 4 or 5 or even 6 degrees. So you have a very steep descent down to the runway on those approaches. And then most importantly, the first extra credit thing you can do is enter what's called our minimums. And on all the chart types, you find the minimums down here at the bottom of the chart in this table-like format. For our approach, you see a few different lines here. We have one that's called LPV, LNAV, VNAV, LNAV, and circling. If we go down here and take a look at our approach, I'm going to go ahead and hit home, and then I'm going to hit proc. You can see that it says LPV right here. So that means that the approach we're set up for is this one that says LPV. The differences between LPV and LNAV, VNAV, and LNAV are pretty much the capabilities of that approach. LPV will actually give us lateral and vertical guidance, and it'll be very precise. So if we look at LPV and follow it across here, we can see 919. This is our altitude that we can descend to based on our barometric altitude. That's what our altimeter shows right here. So we can go all the way down to 919 feet. That happens to be 250 feet above the ground. So all we have to do to put these minimums in the Garmin is go down here to our first touchscreen where it says PFD home and hit this minimums button. And it says Baro minimums. We'll put in the big number here, 919, and then hit enter. And that's all we have to do to set the minimums. If you look up here on the PFD, primary flight display, it shows our Baro minimums set right here, 919, as a reminder. And also, when we reach that altitude, it will audibly say minimums for us, so we can hear that as a reminder as well. So when we hear minimums or we reach minimums right here, 919, we know that's our cue. If we do not see the runway, we have to do what's called a missed approach. But that's a topic for another video. Now, since you're probably not flying to the exact same airport as me and flying the exact same approach as me, you may not get an LPV approach. And that means that you'll have maybe LNAV, VNAV and have higher minimums. LNAV, VNAV will also provide vertical guidance to you. Or you'll have an LNAV approach, which is just lateral guidance. That's only going to line you up with the runway with no official vertical guidance. But because we have the Garmin, it's going to give us still that advisory vertical path, vertical guidance down towards the runway. Just remember, just like with the visual approaches though, those advisory vertical guidances are not to be fully trusted, right? They could bring you down into terrain or buildings. There's no guarantee of obstacle clearance. So you really do need to be able to see where you're going when you're using those to help you. So I still have about 25 minutes until my top of descent. I'm just going to keep zooming my map in so I can see some detail as we get closer. And then once we hit our top of descent, we will go all the way down to 2,300 eventually when we're on that final approach course. All right, it's about 8 minutes until our top of descent. I'm going to go ahead and check the weather at the destination airport. There's a couple ways we can do this. First, if I open up the tablet and we again go to our information page here for our destination and click on weather, sometimes you'll have weather available, especially if it's a larger airport, like we do in this case. So in this METAR section here, this stands for Meteorological Aerodrome Report. Just think of it as a weather report. And it shows that this weather report, the weather data, was gathered at the airport itself. And here it's got a bunch of stuff, but the thing I'm looking for is actually not in the summary here. It's right here after the A. This is the altimeter setting at the airport, 3032. So what I'm going to do is go down here and use my Baro knob to pre-select 3032. So right here in the pre-selector in gray, because I'm in standard Baro, I've pre-selected 3032, and when we get under 18,000 feet, I can just right click on the baro knob to push it, and that will flip us back to 3032. Now, as we're nearing our top of descent, ATC has not told us to descend yet. So this is kind of a point where you have to decide, do you want to listen to ATC and hope they clear you for the approach or give you a descent or not? Or do you just want to kind of ignore them and fly down on your own to make sure you get down to the correct altitude in time? You're not scrambling to descend too fast. So in my case, I'm going to ignore ATC, but we will listen to see what they say. I may take some penalties for changing my altitude without their permission. I'm actually going to change some things on my flight plan here to take advantage of auto throttle this time. In part 2, we just pulled our throttle ourselves to disengage auto throttle and just manually set our throttle for our approach. But let's go ahead and be a little more precise this time. I know that at Jalpi, we're going to make this big right-hand turn. So I want to be like maybe 180 knots or so when we make that turn. So I'm just going to put in a speed constraint here at 180 knots and then hit enter over here. So now we have at Jalpi, we're telling the auto throttle to reduce our speed and cross Jalpi where we're making that big right turn at 180 knots. And then I need to look down here and remind myself our flap speed's 190 and 150. So I want to be below 150 knots by the time we get past our final approach fix here, so I can make sure my flaps and my gear are down. And that's kind of fast still, so I'm just going to take this and change it down to like 95 knots. And you can change these to personal preference based on, how you feel on these approaches, how fast and rushed it feels to you. You might want to slow down even further than this earlier, but it's totally up to you.
Southeast. Maintain present heading and altitude. Expect RNAV runway 9er approach by a Tango Victor Charlie transition. Cleared to Tango Victor Charlie.
Okay, so the ATC just gave us our approach. We're going to hit enter to accept their approach. You can see what they said to us here in the transcript if you didn't catch it verbally when they said it to you. It said expect RNAV runway 9 approach via the TVC transition and cleared to TVC. So if you remember back when we picked our approach transition point, if I go into procedures, approach, transition, TVC was the one that was way further south. So they're actually instructing us to go directly to TVC. So if you want to listen to them, you would go in and load RNAV runway 9 approach, TVC transition. And in this case, because they said cleared to TVC, that means we can go directly to TVC right now. And a convenient way to do that is hit load and activate. That's not only going to load all the approach information in our flight plan, but it's also going to make TVC our active waypoint. And since we have navigation mode turned on, it would result in us turning directly to TVC. But again, because we set it up beforehand and I decided, I'm going to not listen to ATC, I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that change. And we're just going to stick to ours. That's taking us a bit further north to this other waypoint here called Bakhta instead. And the next step it's giving us is that we can contact the tower. So I'm just going to wait till we get a little bit closer to contact the tower. I'm also double checking our mission steps here where it says fly to Jalpi. And I just want to look in my waypoints and make sure we're going to fly to Jalpi, which we are right here. That's where we're making that right-hand turn for the final approach course. All right, so we're way under 18,000 feet. So I'm going to right click the baro here. So now I have 3032 in. I grabbed that from the weather in the tablet earlier. If you don't have that, again, you can just hit the comma key on your keyboard if you have one. Or if you're on Xbox or you don't have a keyboard, you can go and find a setting in your controller settings called set altimeter and bind something to that. And that'll do the same thing. It'll automatically set that altimeter setting whenever you hit it to what the correct value is. All right, so as we're approaching this final turn, we're expecting the auto throttle system to slow us down to meet that speed restriction I put in here, 180 knots and then 95 knots by the time we get to the final approach fix. And we're expecting it to level off at 2,700 feet. And then shortly after that, it's going to descend us again to get down ultimately to 2,300 feet. Now, because this is a GPS approach, we just keep this on GPS mode, on FMS mode. When we eventually do an ILS approach in another part in this series, we're going to need to come down here and change that navigation source to use our navigation radios for an ILS approach. But because this is an RNAV GPS approach, we just leave that button where it is in FMS mode. I can hear the engine power going down now, and we see 180 knots. That's that speed restriction I put in the flight plan. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to contact the tower since we're about to turn to final.
Tango Victor uniform 12 miles southwest inbound RNAV runway 9er approach.
Let's go ahead and check our comm window here to see what's going on here. So we contacted them, but they didn't reply, and we have this button here, so I'm going to hit contact tower again, see what happens. Sometimes you may need to open this little chat bubble comm window to use one of these ATC commands. All right, they're just not replying to us. All right, we're now turning on the final approach course here to line up with runway 9. And we can see our vertical guidance preview right here, this little hollowed out, this gray diamond symbol. Once the vertical guidance is actually available, this will become solid and it'll be magenta because it's a GPS vertical guidance. So what I'm going to do is go down here and hit approach mode on our autopilot. So since I hit approach mode on the autopilot, it says GP, glide path is on standby, but you can see that we're still descending. So this vertical guidance is not catching up to us yet because we're still in the descent. We're going down to 2,300 feet now. All right, now we're about to get the vertical guidance. You can see that the VNAV is still descending us to try to make this next altitude constraint of 2,300 feet. So we'll probably get there, and then after that, the vertical guidance will come down. But you can see the vertical guidance is still a hollow diamond here. Once it's solid, that means it's usable. All right, I can see the runway right out there. I'm going to go ahead and get my gear down, and then I'm going to get my first notch of flaps down as well. Remember that our auto throttle is still controlling our speed. I had told it to fly 95 knots as we get to the final approach fix. So it's automatically handling the power changes needed when we put our flaps out and our gear down. And then here we can see the glide path is now available and it's coming down. And now we're capturing the glide path. And remember our minimums, we can take this vertical guidance all the way down to 919 feet baro, which is our altimeter right here. That would be about 250 on the radar altimeter. This is a height above the ground. I'm going to get my last notch of flaps down now. And then I have to break some bad news to you. And that is that at this point when I'm recording this video, there is a bug with the VisionJet autopilot where it will automatically disconnect your autopilot when you get to 400 feet above the ground. So right now we're at about 1,000 feet, coming down to 1,000 feet above the ground. This approach, technically, we should be able to fly it all the way down to 250 feet. And we can still do that. We just won't do it with the help of autopilot. So when we get to 400 feet, you'll notice the autopilot is just going to disconnect itself automatically. And that's not intended. That is a bug in the VisionJet, but we're going to expect that to happen until it's fixed. In this case, we already have the visual of the runway, so we're totally fine here. I'm going to go ahead and pull my throttle so it turns off the auto throttle. See how we're at 42% power over here? I'm going to pull my throttle back, and now I'm going to pull it back up to 42% where it had it. A little lower than that. And you can see auto throttle is flashing, so the auto throttle is off. And we're at 42%. Now I'm going to lower my speed down to that green donut speed near 80 knots. And here comes 400 feet above the ground. So the autopilot's going to turn itself off automatically because of this bug. But if you want, you can go ahead and just turn it off yourself, but I'll show you that it does it here. As soon as that RA says under 400, watch the autopilot come off. There it is. It just disconnected us. So just be ready for that until that bug fix happens. And you can still use the guidance of the approach here. So when I see that diamond going below us, that means I need to pull some throttle out to catch up to it. Just a little bit. Try not to overdo it. And then we have a nice crosswind of 9 knots here. I'm pointing the flight path vector at the runway again, that green crosshair. Now the diamond's about in the middle, adding a little bit of power, watching my speed, watching the diamond, watching the threshold of the runway. Just keeping it aimed to the right here. Try to get that ATC communication in at the last second. All right, pulling the throttle to idle as we cross the threshold. Okay, a little left rudder to straighten our nose out. And then just holding it off and letting the wheels settle down on the ground. Okay, using the rudders to stay on the center line as best I can. And then we're giving it some brakes. Pretty soft brakes because they're just so powerful in the VisionJet. All right, and here's our turnoff. All right, we'll stop here at the hold short. Then I'll get my parking brake on. We're going to go ahead and get our flaps up. Then down here, we're going to get our anti-ice off. Whoops, I left that on. And then our probe heat. Now we can contact. We can hit enter to announce our taxi.
Yankee Bravo, traffic Delta. Tango Victor.
I'm going to hit enter again for our passenger information. And then we're going to look for our parking spot. There it is over there to the left. I had turned the assistances off, but you can use that shortcut we went over in part 1 if you want to turn them back on.
That was a smooth ride. Thanks for the safe travel, Captain. I will recommend your company.
All right, let's go ahead and do the shutdown. We'll just turn the knob, press the button, turn off the oxygen, bleed, lights, generators, make sure that everything is shutting down, and then we'll turn off the batteries. All right, we're all done with that mission, and even though I ignored ATC, I didn't go to the correct transition waypoint they assigned me, and I descended before they told me to, and they yelled at me for it, we still got an S tier ranking. So I hope this video was helpful, and you can now have fun flying all sorts of RNAV GPS approaches around the world. If you want to watch another video that I have about RNAV GPS approaches from a couple years back that has some more detail about them and the differences between the different approach types, go ahead and click the video linked in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next video in this series on flying the Vision Jet.